We all love Dummy 13, Lego, and cool model kits. But now I have a new mission, to find a real Dummy 13 killer. So I ordered a bunch of cheap Gundam kits, and today we're starting with this guy. We'll build the whole figure, test its articulation and durability, and then compare it with Dummy 13 and 3 Mean Project. And if you guys enjoy this series, I'll definitely get some official Bandai Gundams too. Alright, let's get this thing unboxed. The box is pretty basic. It says 14 plus, but honestly I feel like younger builders could probably handle this too. And here's the instruction manual. Everything is clearly laid out, all the parts are numbered. And the plastic quality seems surprisingly decent. I wouldn't exactly call myself a huge expert when it comes to building model kits and especially gunpla, but the plastic and molding quality actually look pretty good. You do need to clean up some of the parts a little, so everything fits together nicely, but that's totally normal. And compared to some of the really cheap kits I've dealt with before, this is already looking much better. One of my first Dummy 13 videos turned into an absolute disaster, so hopefully this one goes a lot smoother. And thankfully, once I actually started building it, things kept going pretty smoothly. A few of the smaller parts are really tiny though, so having some extra tools definitely helps. Tweezers were especially useful for getting those little pieces exactly where they needed to go. I definitely recommend having a pair nearby. Some of the parts also fit very tightly, so every now and then I had to use a little extra force to push them together. But nothing felt impossible, and I never ran into any major problems during the build. That was actually one of my biggest concerns with such a cheap kit. I expected more excess plastic, rough molding, or parts that just wouldn't fit properly. But surprisingly, there really wasn't much of that here. You do have to pay attention to the instructions though, because some of the parts look almost identical but are slightly different sizes. There are also a lot of tiny pieces and small connection points, so mixing something up could easily make the next step more difficult. But overall, I was really impressed with how well everything fit together. And that's interesting because I've watched reviews of official Bandai Gunpla kits where people sometimes had loose pieces, parts that didn't fit perfectly, or even had to use a little glue. Personally, I don't think using glue in one or two spots is a huge deal. But jumping ahead a little, I didn't use any glue at all on this figure, and by the end, everything was holding together really well. There are still a few small gaps in some places though. You'll see them during the build and I'll point them out as we go. But overall, the whole building process was really easy to follow. The instructions were clear, and I never had to sit there wondering what goes where. Honestly, it just made me even more curious to see what Bandai does differently, and whether the official kits really are on another level. Sometimes I had to use a little more force, or sand and clean up the edges a bit more carefully, but it was never a serious issue. The stickers were a little trickier, and the hardest part was definitely the head, because some of those stickers are absolutely tiny. You don't see much of that process on camera because it was really difficult to film properly. I had to hold the head super close to my face just to see exactly where each sticker was supposed to go. But this is how the head turned out, and I actually really like it. And honestly, I think there's a lot more you could do with it. It would be really fun to paint it, customize it, and give it a completely unique look. I've been watching a few Gunpla videos and people do some amazing custom paint jobs on these kits. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to see me try that, because I genuinely love to repaint this figure and come up with my own color scheme. The classic white and blue look is nice of course, but imagine adding some gradients, weathering, metallic details. You could take this pretty cheap model and make it look like something on a completely different level. Here for example, you can see one spot where there was a little more excess plastic left on the part. I had to use a bit more force to cut it off, then clean the area up with a file and do a little extra sanding. But again, nothing serious. I really can't complain about the plastic quality. The only thing I'd probably change is the color scheme. Like I said before, it could definitely be more interesting. That's actually what makes me so curious about the official Bandai kits, because looking at this one, I'm already thinking, how much better can it really get? But people keep telling me in the comments that Bandai is on a completely different level compared to cheap kits like this one. So now I really want to find out for myself. For now though, I'm going to build a few more affordable kits first and compare them. I want to see whether cheap Gunpla can actually be really good, or if the quality varies a lot from kit to kit. And then, after that, we'll move on to something more expensive. And one more time, definitely leave a comment if you want to see that. If you'd like me to build more expensive Gunpla, compare them with these cheaper kits, or even upgrade and customize some of these figures, let me know. Sometimes people watch the video, enjoy it, and just don't comment at all. And then I have absolutely no idea what you actually want to see next. So your comments really help me decide what to make. Alright, let's keep going. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned how long this whole build actually took me. In total, including all the filming, it took about 4 hours. I split the build across 2 days and worked on it in the evenings after work, And honestly, this kind of hobby is surprisingly relaxing. It really clears your head. You stop thinking about everything else for a while and just focus on putting the model together. It's almost like meditation. Here I'm also showing why it's useful to have a few different files and sanding tools with different grit levels. Some areas only need a little cleanup, while others need something slightly rougher. So having a few options makes the whole process much easier. I was actually really surprised by how well everything fit together, especially considering how cheap this kit is. When I was a kid and built similar models, I remember there being way more problems with parts not fitting properly. And now the arm is finished. The articulation isn't amazing though. You can move it around, but you're definitely not going to get any super crazy poses out of it. This isn't Dummy 13, where you can basically move the figure however you want. With this model, the focus is much more on the design than on articulation. It's the same with the head. The range of motion is pretty limited, and this is basically as far as it goes. The shoulder movement is also fairly restricted, as you can see, so you can't really pose it like a human body or put it into all kinds of extreme positions. That could be a small downside if you're buying this mainly to play with, rather than just display it. Although if your main goal is to put a figure on a shelf, maybe it makes more sense to buy something more expensive and detailed. But we'll see. Maybe that's not always true. Still, for a cheap model that you can actually pick up, pose, and play with, I think this one works really well. Another thing I really liked is how easy the whole build is to understand. The instructions are clear, and I never really had to stop and wonder which part was supposed to go where. The only danger is that some of these tiny pieces really like to fly off the table. And with parts this small, if you lose one, there's a good chance you're never seeing it again. So definitely be careful while you're building, and maybe keep your pets away from all the plastic frames too. My cat loves trying to chew basically everything I work with. Luckily, while I was filming this video, he was peacefully sleeping in the corner and had absolutely no interest in what I was doing. And once again, tweezers are a lifesaver here. I'd honestly call them a must-have for this kind of build. I barely used tweezers in some of my previous projects, but with this figure they made things so much easier. And I have a feeling they'll become even more useful once I start building more complicated kits.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right here though, I did run into one small issue while building the leg. One of the parts didn't feel quite as secure as I wanted it to. I'd probably count that as a minor flaw. Ideally, I think this spot could use a little glue, but I decided to leave it alone for now. If it starts falling off later, then I'll glue it. And jumping ahead a little, it never actually fell off. If you do decide to glue anything though, be careful. You definitely don't want glue getting into the joints or any other moving parts, because then you could easily lose some of the articulation. Now about the stickers. When I was a kid building Lego, I absolutely hated putting stickers on. Getting them perfectly straight was always a struggle. And it can be tricky here too, especially because some of these stickers are absolutely tiny. But if you take your time and don't rush, it's really not that bad. You might even enjoy it. Building this whole figure is a pretty meditative process, so some people may actually enjoy working with all these tiny stickers too. Gunpla building is sometimes compared to building Lego, and I can definitely see why. There are some similarities, but at the same time, they feel like completely different hobbies. Gunpla has way more tiny parts, and somehow the whole building process feels even more relaxing and meditative. And honestly, I really enjoy the change of pace. I've built a huge amount of Lego on this channel over the past few years, so it's always fun to try something different. I just really like making things with my hands. Building, creating, painting, all of that. You've probably seen some of my other projects too. For example, I made a Terminator minifigure in one of my videos, and that was such a fun project. I really enjoyed the whole process from start to finish, and now I'm already thinking about what I could do with this Gundam. I've wanted to buy an airbrush and get more seriously into painting and customizing models for a long time, but I never really had a good reason to do it. So if you guys enjoy videos like this, maybe this will finally be my excuse to get one and start making some more serious custom builds. But for now, let's move on to the wings. This is probably one of the most epic looking parts of the whole design, and it gives the Gundam that really recognizable silhouette. And the nice thing is, if you actually want to play with the figure instead of just displaying it, the wings are pretty easy to remove. They can get in the way a little during play, but with them attached, the figure definitely looks much more impressive. When I reviewed the winged Dummy 13 figures, I said pretty much the same thing. Wings look awesome, but they can definitely get in the way when you're actually playing with the figure. So I really like it when you can easily take them off and put them back on whenever you want. And while I was watching gunpla reviews on YouTube, I noticed that the bigger and more expensive kits usually have a lot more moving parts, extra details, and little features. This figure is much simpler in that respect. Just as a reminder, it's 1/144th scale and most likely an HG kit. I do wish it had a little more articulation and a few more moving elements. Of course, that would also make the build more complicated, but that's exactly why I'm so curious to try one of the more expensive kits and see just how detailed and advanced they can get. Now let's see what else we can give our Gundam. We've got a shield, some weapons, and this huge gun that basically looks like a bazooka. The bazooka itself looks pretty good, although the design is fairly simple. Nothing too crazy. But this is another part that could look really cool with a custom paint job, some metallic details, maybe a few extra accents, and it could look completely different. And now the build is finally complete, so let's take a look at the finished figure. Everything moves the way it should, nothing feels loose, and all the parts stay firmly in place. Even that piece on the lower leg that worried me earlier never actually fell off. And now it's time for the comparison that basically inspired this whole video. The first thing I noticed is that a 1/144th Gundam is actually a really good size match for a standard Dummy 13. That's pretty cool because if you want to use them together, they look like they belong in the same world. Although maybe you think the 3-minute project figure is an even better size match, what do you think? Of course, when it comes to articulation, Dummy 13 still wins pretty easily. You can get a lot more poses out of it, and the joints have a much wider range of motion. And honestly, the same can be said about the 3-minute project figure. It's also much more flexible than this Gundam. So let me know in the comments, which one would you rather actually play with? This Gundam, the 3-minute project figure, or Dummy 13? And now let's take a look at the final result. The poses I managed to get out of this figure and how the photos turned out. Overall, I'm pretty impressed with the quality. I'd give this figure around an 8 out of 10, especially for the price. I think that's a really solid result. But now I'm even more curious to see how much better this kind of model can actually get. How different are the original Bandai Gunpla kits compared to a cheap version like this? If you'd like to see that comparison, definitely let me know in the comments. And what do you think? Is this Gundam actually better than Dummy 13? Or does Dummy still stay on top because it's more articulated and more fun to play with? Price-wise, one of these cheaper Gundams costs about the same as 2 Dummy 13 figures. But at the same time, for the price of one original Bandai kit, you can sometimes buy 2 or even 3 cheap Gundams like this one. So yeah, there's definitely a lot to compare. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!